Let's go.
Let's go. Oh, no.
Do you want to?
Sorry. I'll let you.
Next one.
I'm excited and I feel relaxed and I'm ready to party. Let's say sorry. You don't need to do that. You don't need to apologize. It's a fucked up female habit. You don't need to be sorry for anything ever.
Can you guess what every woman's worst nightmare is?
I don't have rage issues!
I have nothing to prove to you.
When I'm good, I'm very good. But when I'm bad, I'm better.
I say when it comes to stardom and Lauren, there are no accidents.
Hi, Karen Peterson.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Citizen Dame, the podcast where everybody is calm and happy and just having just such an easy time of it. I am Lauren Humphries Brooks, and with me, as always, is Karen Peterson. Hello, Karen.
Hello. How are you doing?
I'm all right. The world remains to be seen, but I'm doing okay. How are you?
Same. I went back to work this week. I've been gone for weeks because I was on jury duty and it ended on Monday and I went back to my life. And it was very weird how they just basically, you spend 6 or 7 weeks in a courtroom and then one day you're just done and they, okay, go back to everything like nothing happened. It's a strange feeling. It was a little bit disorienting this week, but it was good to get back into a routine that was more normal. So
More normal for you. Yeah, I understand that definitely.
Yeah.
Well, today we are going to talk about, we're actually going to do a double feature. This is the first double feature that we've done in a while, actually, because one film is a remake of the other. And so today we're going to talk about The Bishop's Wife from 1947 and The Preacher's Wife from 1996. And for those people who have not seen these, both of these are available on streaming. The Bishop's Wife is available on a number of places, including Amazon, I think Tubi, and a couple of other places. The Preacher's Wife is on the Roku channel for free, and then you can also rent it in a number of different places. So let's start with The Bishop's Wife. The Bishop's Wife is a 1947 American. It's interesting. It's described as a supernatural romantic comedy film. And I don't
kind of.
It's kind. I mean, yeah. It's like it's in one of those. It's in the kind of, it's a very small subgenre, but it's sort of in the subgenre that, particularly seem to be post-war films where you've got stories about angels or sometimes devils and demons coming to Earth and affecting the people around them. And so this film stars Cary Grant as Dudley, who's an angel who's been sent down from heaven to assist David Niven, who plays Bishop Harry Brougham. Brougham, something like that.
Brom? I don't know.
Brum.
It's the same name in the book, and I don't know how to pronounce it.
who's prayed for heavenly guidance, and so he gets heavenly guidance in the form of Cary Grant. Henry is married to Julia Loretta Young. And Henry has recently become a bishop. He is trying to build a cathedral, and he is running into a lot of different problems. And so this is one of those stories that's like it kind of falls into those ideas about like discovering the meaning of Christmas and the meaning of community and of Christianity and the meaning of life, I guess. And some of that is filtered through Dudley, and particularly Dudley's building relationship with Julia, which is very much a no-no in the heavenly community. So this was remade in 1996 by Penny Marshall, and was kind of updated and shifted around a little bit to become The Preacher's Wife, starring Denzel Washington as Dudley in the angelic role, and Courtney B. Vance and Whitney Houston as the preacher and The Preacher's Wife. And so I think today we're kind of going to go back and forth between these two films and talk about kind of the comparisons between them, how they develop things like religion, the angel itself, the characterizations, etc. So Karen, sorry, you wanted to say something earlier.
I was just going to mention that The Bishop's Wife was actually based on a novel from the 1920s.
Okay.
And I never read the novel. I don't know if you've ever read it, but
No.
I was reading about it, and it sounds like basic story is pretty much the same, but um and I'm really curious to read it because it sounds like the characterization of Dudley is quite different from what Cary Grant gives us, and what he's expected to do, and his story plays out is really different. And now I'm like, oh, I wish I'd before we started talking about it, because I think it'd be interesting to compare, because my understanding just from the research that I did this week was that Dudley, his hands are kind of tied with his responsibility, and he's here specifically to help the bishop with what he exactly wants to do, which is build this cathedral, even though that's not what he wants to be helping him with. That's what he has to help him with. And so there's definitely this Hollywoodized story here too with the film version.
So yes, there's a lot of contrast between, I think, the characterization, Denzel Washington's characterization and Cary Grant's characterization. And one of them is that Grant seems to be playing an angel who's much significantly older. Like, he has experience with humanity. He has experience with humanity as an angel, whereas the Denzel Washington character is represented as a human who has become an angel but hasn't been back to Earth in a very long time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we get some very specific examples of this with Cary Grant's character, where he knows something from history that nobody else knew, which he shares with the professor. But then with Denzel Washington, you get he specifically, I think, says in one of his conversations with God that that he's new to this. And in a lot of ways, I think that Denzel Washington's version of Dudley looks a lot more like Clarence from It's a Wonderful Life than the Cary Grant version from The Bishop's Wife. And I think that's very intentional too. And I think it leads to some interesting moments that really make the two films kind of diverge.
Yeah, I think one of the things that The Preacher's Wife does very well is that it is the same basic story, right? But it's also different. It also is dealing with different aspects of the characters, of different, like you say, different kinds of characterizations. One of the things that I find interesting is this contrast between, the Cary Grant character, who's an angel who begins to fall in love with a human, right? That's basically what's happening when he begins to develop very human feelings for Loretta Young. And he recognizes this as not being a good thing. He's like, this is, I'm getting too close to humanity, basically. And I'm not supposed to be doing that. And he even says that nearing the end of the film, he says that to Henry, to the bishop. Whereas the Denzel Washington character is much more sort of young and kind of like, ooh, I get to be a person again. Like, he's very excited over, getting to eat food again. He's really like intense about that, like getting to touch snow, being human again. And so his developing feelings for the Whitney Houston character very much come under this guise of him being a person who has died and then is getting to be a person again. And so there's like this developing contrast there.
Yeah, he's kind of the rookie. And I love how when he's first introduced, the first people that see him are these children.
Yeah.
And he lands in the snow and he's so excited, and he kind of has this moment. He scares the kids. He scares these two very adorable boys because of his enthusiasm and his excitement to be back. But him having feelings for the Whitney Houston character, in that case, you can chalk it up to like, yeah, he's still new at this. Whereas, and that's part of his learning process. Whereas the Cary Grant Dudley, very much, this is kind of his, not downfall, but it would be that if he indulged in it.
Well, yeah, exactly. And he does indulge in it a little bit. Like, he begins, so part of what happens in over the course of that film is that it all starts out with like, okay, I'm supposed to be here to help the bishop and to answer his prayer. And the bishop doesn't let him help in certain ways. Like, he won't allow him to go and talk to the wealthy woman, right? He won't allow him to represent. So at one point he even says, well, you wouldn't allow me to represent you here, so I represented you with your wife.
Yeah.
And so you've got this, like, so he is kind of filling in for, as it were, the bishop, where the bishop tells him to. And this is what develops into like his developing feelings about Julia, and also just about being human and feeling human. And that's where I think there is this moment where it's not insidious, but it's like dangerous, because he begins enjoying himself. He starts kind of sort of hoping almost, or creating situations where the bishop gets further and further away from his family, and Dudley gets more and more embedded in it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Whereas I think in the Denzel Washington version, there's definitely some moments where he does that. Like there's a scene where he takes Whitney Houston and their son, Jeremiah, he takes them to ice skate, which is also similar to a scene that happens in The Bishop's Wife. And this in the Denzel Dudley delays Courtney B. Vance, like makes all the lights change. There's so much traffic, he can't get there. But because he does that, what ends up happening is that the preacher, in this case the pastor, he's starting to realize all the things he's missing out on by not being around his family. So it's like it's a similar way of handling things, but with I don't know, with like a different, it's just sort of this, I don't know. Dudley just kind of, the Denzel Dudley has sort of just sort of a more playful way of accomplishing ultimately what needs to happen, which is getting this guy to reconnect with his family. And keeping him away from them is actually an interesting approach, but one that turns out to be very effective.
Yes, that's true. That's true. Yeah, like I just said, I think that The Preacher's Wife is a good example, actually, of a remake that is that's similar enough to the original, but is also doing different things to the original, and so you get kind of a good balance. I didn't feel like I was rewatching the same film, basically.
Yeah,
it was a very different
same, and
approach.
I watched them back to back the same night. Like I watched The Bishop's Wife, and then I immediately started The Preacher's Wife, and it was interesting watching them that way because you really do see where they diverge, and it's easy to, well, I don't know if easy is the right word, but it becomes very clear sort of why there are some of the differences that there are, and how these two films both can exist, and it's not taking anything away one from the other to watch them both and to just be kind of to fall in love with these characters who, I mean, all of them, from Dudley to the central, religious figures, all of the characters are so different from each other, and it's fun. The thing that's interesting about The Preacher's Wife too is that a lot of it is, I mean, it's not all told from the perspective of the son, but it's narrated by him.
Yeah.
And while he's still a child, this isn't someone who's grown up and is sharing this childhood memory. This is someone who's still a kid, basically telling this story of the time an angel came and saved his family and saved his neighborhood.
Yeah, and he's at the end of the film, he's the only one who remembers that Dudley is an angel. He's the only one who remembers Dudley. Like he recognizes Dudley as they're leaving the church. Everybody else has forgotten him. They don't know who he is. And Jeremiah remembers him, and so he's the one that tells the story. Yeah, it's interesting again because the daughter in the 47 film isn't like she's present, but she's not a very prominent character. Right? She's kind of there as not as a I don't want to say as a tool, but her and actually all of the children in the film are very much symbolic in a lot of ways. Yeah. And so she is not as like central to the narrative, which essentially the narrative becomes about, the bishop rediscovering what Christianity means, like what his family means, the people that he actually wants to connect to, via sort of this developing jealousy of this angel. Who essentially tells him, and he's right, at one point he's just like, you asked me to do this. Like this is what you asked for. I will do whatever you want me to do, but this is what you're asking for. And he's like, no, I don't want you doing this anymore.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's just interesting the difference between their goals too. So
Yeah.
you have, on the one hand, you have the bishop who wants this cathedral, which is supposed to be like this monument to God. It's supposed to be the symbol of his belief and his faith, and this symbol for the community. That's what he wants. And the pastor, the preacher in the preacher's wife, I mean, he's got this developer who's coming in and trying to buy up the land, but he's really just trying to keep people together, keep his community together. Everything he's doing is just trying to just keep people going. And so, yeah, so they have you, and it's interesting too to look at the one who wants to build the cathedral. It's this very white, very, upper middle class to rich community versus this just very, very normal Black neighborhood with a whole range
Yeah.
of socioeconomic, levels. And and I think there's a lot of intent in that. And I think that it's interesting to just look at the way that each of these religious leaders treat the people around them and what their goals are and what they're trying to achieve, and how for each of them separately, because of their different types of goals, they've lost their way in things that seem like the right thing, and they're trying to do what God wants them to do, or whatever that looks like, but they've become blinded to other important things around them.
Yeah, so like in the bishop's wife, part of the bishop's problem is that he's actually become disconnected from the community, because he has started out as like this the pastor of like a small city church, right? And at some point he gets elevated, he becomes a bishop, and he's got this whole thing about he wants to build this cathedral. And the conflict that is going on is between him and this very wealthy woman who basically wants to build a cathedral in honor of her husband. Not really in honor of God, right?
Right.
But his whole thing is like, I've got to get the cathedral built. And so he's making concessions, and he's going to committee meetings, and he's doing all of these things. And so he's completely removed from even just preaching. Like, he's not even really writing his sermons that closely. He's not engaging in the community around him, and he's completely neglected the community of his original church, with which he is still participating in supposedly, but he's like not showing up to choir practice. He isn't doing that. He's occupied with the business of religion, basically. Whereas the preacher in The Preacher's Wife is too involved in the community almost. He's trying to fix everything all the time. And the result is he's kind of losing sight of even what he is meant to be doing. And he's also disconnecting from his wife. He's not giving his wife even just a little bit of attention. There's a whole scene of them at breakfast where she's saying she's about to make a suggestion, and he just like walks right over her. He just keeps on talking. He says he doesn't have time for this. And the problem is it's coming from like a good place, in the sense that he's trying to help everybody, but he's not listening to anyone. He's not actually listening, particularly not to his wife, who might actually have insight into things.
Yeah. Yeah. And he doesn't really want to hear what anybody has to say. And part of the problem for him, part of it is that he just thinks that he has to be the specific person to fix everything.
Yeah.
Everything is on his shoulders, and that's exhausting. That is emotionally and physically exhausting. It's spiritually exhausting. And so he's very tired. And also because of that, he just has this enormous pressure that he puts on himself that nobody else, I mean, people have expectations of him, but part of that is just because he's always there. He doesn't give other people the opportunity to step up and be the ones to answer each other's problems and help, and
yeah.
And so it's really, when you get yourself into that situation, it very much is like, I just got to keep my head down and keep going. And it can become very difficult to even acknowledge or hear that there are other people around that also want to help, because you just think, I just have to get through this. I just have to do it.
Yeah, and he's also asked for heavenly guidance. Like he's asked for
Right.
help from God, and God's like, okay, here's an angel.
Uh-huh.
Here's an angel to help you. And he keeps on, and in both films, he keeps on being like, no, I don't want the angel to help me.
That's
Like,
not the help I wanted.
yeah, it's well, and I think it's that sense of and both films deal with this, is that sense of wanting basically what both the bishop and the preacher want is in some way for there to literally be a miracle and for God to fix everything.
Hmm.
And that's not what, in at least in the spiritual worlds of these films, that's not what God does. God does not just make everything okay, basically.
Right.
But God does, like, okay, I've sent you a helper here for you to use to help yourself, but you have to be proactive in actually helping yourself, and you have to also make the right decisions. So in both films, the Henry, the bishop or the preacher character, uh, keeps on kind of putting Dudley in the wrong place. Basically, it's like, I'm going to go do this, and you take care of my wife. Just like, do not send peak Denzel Washington out dancing with your wife. He might be a dork, but have you looked at him? Like,
Right.
don't do that.
Especially the wife you have been neglecting.
Yeah, well, and that's the other thing. And of course, there's this there's just the difference between the 1940s and the 1990s, but there's definitely this undercurrent of like the preacher and his wife aren't really having sex. Like that's part of what's going on. Like she is not being paid attention to in any way as like a woman,
Mhm.
as
Yeah.
as like a partner for him, as his wife, etc. And so she is basically like, I don't have anything. And so you've got this attractive angel who's paying attention to her and is talking to her and is flirting with her and all of these things. It's just like, bro, you got it. Do you notice the fact that like the angel is about to seduce your wife?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And the thing is that no, he doesn't notice
Yeah.
because he's so wrapped up in everything else that's going on until it's right in front of him. Like when they come home from being out dancing, which he has told Dudley, take my wife out dancing. And then when they clearly had a wonderful time and they're laughing and enjoying each other's company, then he's just like, whoa, 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 wait a minute. That's not what I wanted. So yeah. But also, shoot, what was I gonna say? Dang it. I lost it.
So
I'll think of
okay.
it.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, so let's talk a little bit about so Loretta Young plays Julia in The Bishop's Wife, and then we've got Whitney Houston playing Julia in The Preacher's Wife, and it's one of those times that I'm like, even the Denzel Cary Grant, contrasts are one thing. These are just two very different characters, it feels like.
Mhm.
And I felt in some ways that the Whitney Houston character was actually less well developed in some ways than the Loretta Young character. What do you think? What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's true because I think that the focus, I think to me, I think the focus in The Bishop's Wife is actually on both the bishop and his wife. And I think in The Preacher's Wife, there's more of a focus on the preacher. I'm curious about how that happened though, because from what I know of where Whitney Houston was in her life at this time, I'm curious if part of that was just that they had to make some changes,
Mm-hmm.
specifically because she wasn't mentally available for certain things. In fact, it even took her a very long time to be convinced to do the movie because she said that she couldn't connect with the character and that she was really struggling with that. So, but they wanted her for this, and they end up, I think, kind of supplementing some of the character development by letting Whitney sing, which
Yeah.
is really what people want with Whitney Houston. But I feel like that was a sacrifice that was made because of the actress, not because of the character development, in like not what was intended or what they would have hoped for.
Yeah, so something like that. She just feels a little bit vaguer, I guess,
Yeah.
than the Loretta Young character. And And some of it is also, so you've got a couple of different relationships going on as well. So you've got the between the Whitney Houston and the Denzel Washington character, and then the Cary Grant and the Loretta Young character. And there's I think that I mentioned this earlier, that Cary Grant in The Bishop's Wife he's immediately charming. Like, it's established that he charms pretty much everybody upon meeting him. Like, all of the women are just like, oh my God, like they're making him cakes, right? Like, just immediately. So, and that includes the Loretta Young character. There is no mistrust going on.
He
They're
also
just like,
has a
oh,
lot of experience with this work.
yeah, and that's what's being represented. And so you've got like that kind of relationship that develops, and the other thing is that I said this earlier too, he's very suave. Like, he's Cary Grant, first of all, but the character that he's playing is not particularly bumbling or confused or anything like that. He's very likable. He's very, like, he knows what people want because that's part of his job. And he knows how to help them find what they want. Whereas the Denzel character is much less that. He is more bumbling. He's not as immediately like engaged in the world. He's not as immediately aware of what he needs to do, right? And so there's a little bit more distrust between the two characters before she is eventually charmed by him. And yeah.
Well, I was just thinking, as you were talking about that, I was just thinking too that in The Preacher's Wife, you have three women kind of circling around in this house, because you've got Julia, which is Whitney Houston, and then you've got her mother, who lives there too, which is Jennifer Lewis, and she is so funny. I love her, and she definitely she enjoys having Denzel in the house for sure. And then you also got Loretta Devine, who plays Beverly, who is the preacher's secretary, who thinks that she's being replaced when he gets there. And she's automatically just like, who are you? Who sent you? Why are you here? Why am I getting fired? And so she's kind of having a meltdown because she's a single mom with 3 kids that she's trying to take care of, and she thinks she's losing her job. So the situations that each of these Dudleys is coming into is also just different, and the neighborhoods and the communities they're coming into are very different. And so you have, I think, some of Julia's characterization that we would have seen kind of goes to the other 2 women that are there.
Yeah, I thought that makes sense to me. Yeah, I think that you're probably right. And it's unfortunate in a certain sense, because I don't think we get that same kind of romantic tension developing between Whitney Houston and Denzel Washington as we do with Cary Grant and Loretta Young. There's a point where, like, and Dudley even says, like, this is dangerous. Like, this is, I should not be feeling like this about a human being, and this is not my job. And he's very aware of that, whereas the Denzel character is very much, his response to it is like, he kind of knows that he's not supposed to be doing it, but he's enjoying himself so much. And he kind of has to be, like, at one point he literally has to be reprimanded by God. And be like, all right, I won't, but so let's talk a little bit about the representation of the wealthy, because in both of these films, you've got a wealthy individual in particular, who is kind of one of the cruxes of the conflict, of the, like, worldly conflict, at least. And in The Bishop's Wife, it is Agnes Hamilton, played by Gladys Cooper, who is this wealthy woman who is giving the bishop money to build the cathedral. And she was the one that also recommended him for the post, right? So she's kind of assigned herself as, like, she has elevated him in some way. But she's giving the money to build this cathedral, and she's insisting that this basically be built in honor of her husband. In The Preacher's Wife, you have Gregory Hines plays Joe Hamilton, who is, again, a wealthy man, but a man who came from the neighborhood, right? And has obviously become wealthy, and has sort of moved up, as it were, and moved up out of the neighborhood, and is trying to basically build what's Crystal Cathedral. And it's unclear whether he thinks he's doing this for the community or whether he thinks that he's just doing it for himself, or what is actually going on, I think, in his mind about why he's you know, he wants the preacher to become the preacher of this cathedral.
Oh, I didn't feel like it was that unclear. I felt like it was really just about like wanting, like, well, we know this area needs a church and we've got a preacher here and we want his land, like the land that this church is built on. So to me, it felt very much like it was about himself and just like, what can he do to elevate the area, not about actually making sure that the church had a home.
Well, and what I mean by that is whether or not he actually thought that he was going to wind up benefiting the people in the community. Or...
Oh, I don't think he cares about that.
Okay, all right.
Personally, it's interesting though that you say it's not clear, because I feel like it is clear that he doesn't actually care about the people. He's just doing what he's supposed to do.
Yeah,
quote unquote supposed to do.
He's doing it for personal. He's doing it. I mean, in both cases, you basically have someone who's doing it for personal gain in one way or another.
Yeah.
What is revealed about Mrs. Hamilton is that she's like obsessed basically with doing all of these monuments to her husband, in part because she never loved him. And he died and she feels bad about it. So she's doing a lot of it out of guilt. And so she's definitely not doing it in order to benefit the community or in honor of God. She's doing it in honor of this guilt, essentially, that she feels about her deceased husband.
Right, because she was in love with somebody else the whole time.
Yeah, and she recognized that he was poor, and so she never married him. She didn't go off with him. She was supposed to, and then she decided not to, and then she marries this man who loves her, but whom she does not love, and she has basically spent most of her, at least most of her old age, trying to assuage that guilt. And that's what Dudley eventually reveals out of her. So one of the things that I think is interesting is that both of these characters are failing in the social contract. They are attempting to use religion to aggrandize themselves in some way. And they're also failing what, within a social democratic construct is the job of the wealthy is to benefit the poor. You're supposed to give back to the community. And that's what they are both failing in slightly different ways, but they have, it's not even that they've necessarily lost their way. It's that they are not participating in society in the way that they're supposed to. And that's one of the sources of the conflict.
Right, because technically they are giving back to the community by giving money to build these big churches. But that's not what the community, in either situation, that's not actually what the community needs. And because of the fact that they're doing it for the wrong reasons, it doesn't have the correct intent or meaning behind it. And therefore it's an empty gift. It's an empty gesture.
Yeah, the issue of intention is really important throughout both of these films. Why people are doing the things that they're doing, not just what they're doing. And you get that with the wealthy characters. You also get it with the bishop to a certain degree. Is like, so I think that in The Bishop's Wife, and the preacher, but I think that in The Bishop's Wife, Dudley basically asks him, why do you want to build this cathedral? Like, what are you doing it for? And he said, well, for God. It's just like, well, God doesn't care.
Right.
God does not think this is important. God cares about the little people like that. And there's definitely that sort of Christian thread of caring about the poor and the working classes and the people who actually need help throughout both of the films.
Yeah. Whereas one thing, and this is the point I was going to make earlier, and I lost it, and I remembered what I was going to say. But in the Reverend, the Courtney B. Vance character, he's trying to help people. Like, for instance, it starts in the beginning, there's this kid who is falsely accused of stealing something and gets arrested. And so the preacher is trying to help him out, but doesn't really believe that he's innocent. And so there's a lot of things where he's going about trying to help people and trying to do what he needs to do to keep the community going, but he's lost his way because he doesn't necessarily believe in the people anymore. He's just kind of just doing it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, and Dudley even asks him, it's like, do you actually believe that he's innocent?
Mhm.
Have you asked him if he did it?
Right.
And it's quite clear that he doesn't believe it. He doesn't, like, he never asked the kid, and he does not really believe that he didn't do it. And then he finally does, and he finally says, like, did you, like, actually commit this crime? It's like, no.
Mhm.
And he believes him, and it's that he takes him on faith to a certain degree because he knows this guy, and he's actually, starting to pay attention to what the people in the community want from him versus what he thinks they expect of him.
Yeah. And as soon as he starts to do that, he regains this enthusiasm, and like his energy comes back. He's been just kind of trudging along, like I was saying earlier, like he's so tired, he's weary. And once he starts to put his attention in the right things and actually believe in people again, that energy comes back and he becomes kind of unstoppable. He's bouncing around, he's happy, and he's just enthusiastically, joyfully helping people instead of just trying to get through a day.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And that in turn then contributes to, like, his relationship with his wife, because I think that at one point she even says that he's not happy, like that she can see that he's not happy. And because he's so tired, because he's just, like, constantly, say, has this burden on him, or feels like he has this burden on him, he's not actually enjoying the job that he has or the community that he exists in. And that then reflects on his relationship with her, and she wants to see him happy. She wants to see him active and, like, participating in a way that is actually joyful.
Yeah. And they've known each other their whole lives. Like there's one part where she tells Dudley about how, like, they were next to each other in their strollers, and like they grew up together, and he started trying to impress her when they were 10 years old. And there's something, it's very easy to take somebody for granted when you've known them that long and you know them so well, and they'll just always be there. And once something starts to upset that, he thankfully goes the way of, like, oh wait, something does have to change, instead of just letting it fall apart.
Yeah.
And I think that's because of Dudley's influence. I think if Dudley wasn't there, it would have all fallen apart, and he would have been, like, kind of left in the rubble and going, what happened? I did everything that God wanted me to do, and nothing worked. And it would have been it would have probably been destroyed his faith in everything.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. There was one element that I was interested in, again, as a person who's just seen The Preacher's Wife. I'd never seen it before last night, actually. And one of the interesting things is that there isn't a corollary character to the Monty Woolley character in The Bishop's Wife. So there's this professor in The Bishop's Wife who is a friend of Julia and Henry's, and he's kind of an agnostic. He's not particularly religious. He's sort of acerbic. He's Monty Woolley. But there's this whole, like, sort of subplot about Dudley in particular reintroducing him to sort of the joy of intellectual pursuit. And it's interesting, but then there's no correlation to that to that character in The Preacher's Wife. And I think in some ways it might be because they couldn't quite fit in the character, but I found it interesting that there is so much. It's one element in The Bishop's Wife that is kind of almost departing from the theme of religion, because it isn't about converting him. It isn't about, making him believe or anything like that. It's about him rediscovering what he loves and being able to do what he loves. And he does go into a church at the end, but there's not this, like, major conversion moment or anything. Whereas The Preacher's Wife is in some ways is almost more heavily focused on religion in a sort of dichotomous way. What are your thoughts on that?
So I kind of wonder, I mean, this is 1947, it's post-war, there's a lot of, people have kind of, there's a religious, it's not like a religious revival, but there is definitely a lot of faith. The churches are full at this time. And so I don't know, in a sense, I kind of think, even though it doesn't call it out directly, I think it is sort of addressing that in the context of the 1940s of
Mm-hmm.
you have this angel who comes from God who is giving this non-religious person sorry giving this non-religious person kind of this thirst for knowledge and life again, and it's sort of this like all these, it's basically, to me, I look at it, it's basically saying all things come from God, like whether it's specifically religious or not.
Mm.
And so that's what I think. I don't think it's intentionally not religious. I think it's actually the opposite. It's just a little bit more subtle.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. And then you do have the image of him finally going into the church at the end.
Exactly.
And yeah, and sort of playing there's also that, like, that 1940s emphasis on Christmas. Christmas is really important, not just in a religious sense, but in a communal sense, in a social sense, etc. That you have to participate not just in the traditions of Christmas, but in the spirit of it,
Right.
the emotions of it. And in fact,
Right.
in the film, pretty much ends with the bishop giving this sermon about the empty stocking, about not acknowledging Christ at Christmas.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. And I think, no, there's not an equivalent character because there's not an intellectual, like, professor type person, but I think that you do see something a little bit similar with how certain characters are handled, because you have this kid who was arrested, who the preacher gets him out of jail. He gets free to go home to his family. He hasn't been to church in years, and at the end he's in church because the preacher believed in him and kind of got him his life back.
Yeah, I think, all right, yes, you've convinced me. That's true.
So it's definitely not the same, but I think that's kind of where the equivalence happens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that idea about God in one way or another permeating the entire community and working through the presence of the angel and then ultimately the presence of other human beings.
Yeah.
And particularly the preacher, the bishop.
Yeah.
So anything else you want to talk about this film? I've said a lot.
I feel like we've kind of hit it. I do, just going back to, we kind of talked a little bit about the kid,
Mm-hmm.
Jeremiah, and that's another thing. So this is something that I thought was an interesting sort of I don't know if they even thought about it that deeply, but I kind of did a little bit. So in the book, which again, I have not read, I just read about it. I need to fix that. But in the book, the wife is not, like, the bishop and the wife are not, they don't love each other. But when Dudley leaves, she's just kind of like, well, this is the life I'm in. And she's not going to leave her husband, but she decides that she'll have another baby so that she can have someone else to give her love and attention to, basically. And so
That's fucking
I know
dire.
that's not what they're doing in The Preacher's Wife. That's not what they're doing at all. And I love that they actually, in both of these movies, really do focus on these two couples coming back together and falling back in love with each other. I really appreciate that. But I did think it was kind of interesting that in the end of The Preacher's Wife, the son, who really wanted a brother for Christmas, kind of gets his wish, and they do end up having a second child. And I thought, I wonder if that idea kind of came from the book a little bit, maybe. I don't know. But I'm glad that they both ended much differently from the book.
That's really fucking dire. That's like, oh my God. Oh,
It's
well, I don't.
the book. Well, you have to remember too, the book came out in the 20s, so it's like in between wars, and the world was just a different place then.
I don't love my husband, so I'll just have another baby.
Yeah.
Just like, that's a bad reason to have a child.
Right?
Wow.
But I like that in The Preacher's Wife, they have this kid who's been displaced. He's in foster care because his mom died and his grandma can't take care of him. And it's heartbreaking, the scene where he gets picked up and is leaving, and these two little boys have to say goodbye to each other. And then when you find out that he gets to come back and they're going to be brothers for real, it's just like, oh my gosh, that makes me so happy. It's good for everybody. Everybody wins.
It's true. Everybody does win. It's very well. But I will say both of these films are very uplifting. They're very they are about, regardless of regardless of whether you're religious or not, whether you're Christian or not, etc. They are these very happy films that are ultimately, a lot of the time, they are about love and community. However you want to read, if you want to read it as God's love, if the trappings of organized religion, etc. But both of them very much try to go back to this idea of, it's not about the building. It isn't about the form of worship. It isn't about how you relate to God. It's about the people that you love and kind of the love within the community and the connections between human beings.
Yeah.
And in fact, that's what Dudley is being seduced by in a lot of ways. He wants those connections, and it's something that is not available to him as an angel. He's not human.
Right. Yeah, it's so true.
So, all right. So I think that's going to close us out for this week. These are both I think they're really interesting films. It would have been interesting to watch them back to back. I did not. Just things didn't fall out that way. But I do like that they are, they're taking the same narrative, but they're still doing very different things with it, and they're very enjoyable, both of them, to watch.
Yeah. I also like that I got you to watch 4 Penny Marshall films this year.
I completely, I started the phone. I was like, oh, that's right. This is Penny Marshall. I completely forgotten. This was just not one that I knew about. I remember when it came out vaguely. It was so I would have been about 10, and I think I'd actually seen The Bishop's Wife. And yeah, I just never saw it. So.
Oh. Well, I'm glad you finally did, and I'm glad that you liked it.
Yes, it was very good. So both of these films are available to stream in various places, and definitely check them out, especially if you haven't seen one or both of them.
Yeah.
So I think that is going to close us out for this week. And as always, we want to thank our wonderful and amazing patrons, who include Abby, Ali, Audra, Brian, Connor, Estefania, Ferdinand, Heather, James, Judy, Carriata, Matt, Michelle, Monty, Nanina, Noel, Robert, Steve, Sharon, and Tao. Thank you so much for continuing to support us. We do have, I think now, all of the bonus episodes for Our Flag Means Death are up, to the point that I also started rewatching the series yesterday. So listen to those episodes, then go back and rewatch the series, and then listen to the episodes again, and you could just go back and forth the entire time. If you want to become a patron and join in all of the fun, we are going to start doing another series, I think, at the start of the year, and we're going to be putting up some things about that later on. That will be on our Patreon. It's patreon.com/citizendame. And of course, we have our Ko-Fi, ko-fi.com/citizendame, where you can throw us a couple of dollars if you feel like it. You can also get in touch with us a few different ways. We have our website, that's citizendamepod.com. I know that Karen has some really good stuff up there, and we've got some reviews and various things that are coming up on the website as well. And of course, you can email us at citizendamepod@gmail.com. And we are on some of the socials. We are definitely on Instagram and Blue Sky at Citizen Dame Pod. And we are Letterboxd HQ at Citizen Dame. And you can find links to all of our episodes there, articles, etc., and also some fun lists and stuff like that. Next week, we are going to be coming back with Carol, which I'm very excited to talk about. Not like we haven't talked about this film multiple times on this podcast.
So excited.
But we haven't actually done like a deep dive on this, so I'm thrilled that we're going to do that. And so yeah, so we will be back next week, and of course you can get in touch with us individually. Karen, where are you?
I am on all the socials. Well, okay, Blue Sky, Instagram, Letterboxd at Karen M. Peterson.
And I am on Instagram and Letterboxd. Maybe I'll return to Blue Sky at some point when I am less in the middle of like PTSD about it. It's too Twitter-like. It gives me shakes.
It's so much better than Twitter. It really is.
So I'm on right now. I'm on Instagram and Letterboxd at LH Business. So that will close us out for this week. Thank you so much for listening.
Bye.
Who are you?
I'm an angel. I was instructed to come here in answer to your prayer.
There's no time to lose.
Because the cathedral must be built, or because Julia must be happy?
This has been the most wonderful evening I've had in years.
This has been the most wonderful evening I've had in centuries.
I don't believe you're an angel. I think you're a demon right out of...
Oh, really?
So who sent you exactly?
The top man himself.
Now that's what I call good looking.
My toilet is broken.
Let's see what I can do here.
What they needed was a miracle.
It never had a siren.
They got him instead.
Take your wife out dancing.
Can't do it. Not tonight.
You go.
Henry?
Oh, my.